Hello and welcome into the Locked On Wolves podcast. We are live following the Timberwolves win over the Philadelphia 76ers. Marney Gellner, Bally Sports North, joins the show live to break it all down. The Locked On Wolves postcast starts right now.
You are Locked On Wolves postcast, part of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Marney Gellner, Bally Sports North, is with us to talk through the Wolves' road win over the Sixers. This is the Wolves' third win in a row, and Marney, there was a lot to like about this game, a lot that felt pretty similar to the last couple of wins. They built, again, for the third game in a row, the Wolves built a big lead against a shorthanded opponent and give most of it back, but then execute just enough down the stretch to pull out what ended up being a pretty exciting and obviously important win.
Yeah, it's crazy how similar these last three games have been. It's like the same theme. Like, here's the script, read through it, and then we're gonna roll through this play 3 straight nights at this theater. And thanks for coming. But you could hear it in Chris Finch's voice in his post-game press conference. Like, he was not out there sounding like a guy who felt pretty good about himself after winning 3 straight. So I'm hoping that the team has that same kind of attitude and they're not walking around like chest puffed out like we got this all figured out. It's more like yeah, we know we weren't great, especially in the fourth quarter, especially the second half of the fourth quarter. But there is something to be said for just figuring out a way to piece it all together and still end up with a win.
Yeah, and I mean, my biggest takeaway, I want to talk about the fourth quarter in a minute. In terms of a good thing that happened in this game, I thought that the defense for the vast majority of the game was really, really good. They did a good job on Joel Embiid. I know he scored 32 points, but I mean, given the numbers he's been putting up lately, that's not necessarily an L, right? Especially when no Tyrese Maxey, no James Harden, no Tobias Harris, missing, 60% of their starting lineup. Giving up 32 to Embiid is fine, and 18 of it on free throws for that matter, which I guess is a pretty typical formula for him. But the Wolves did a pretty good job on him. I thought Rudy was okay, especially in the second half. He struggled a little bit early, got into a little bit of foul trouble, but I thought Gobert was good in the second half when he was guarding Embiid. The Wolves did a really good job having active hands when they were guarding him, and Towns guarded him for chunks of the game and also got into a little bit of foul trouble in the second half. But bringing late doubles on post-ups, just kind of essentially having almost like another layer of defense against Embiid, and just really having active hands, tipping the ball away in some instances. They forced him into a couple of turnovers. He traveled at least twice in this game. I think they just mucked things up enough to make Embiid's life a little bit more challenging. And overall, I thought defensively, the Wolves competed really well.
Yeah, and how about the defensive play at the end of the game after Anthony Edwards had his pocket picked? I think that was DeAnthony Melton. And busted back and made the defensive play. And then Carl was there too to get the rebound. I mean, that could have been disastrous. And I know that's just one play and you better play defense in that situation. But throughout the game, I don't think there were times when it was just this defense was horrendous. And we talk about the squandering a lead in the fourth quarter. Well, the Wolves only scored 15 points. They gave up 25. I mean, that's not a ton. So it wasn't defensive breakdowns that almost cost the Timberwolves this game. It was more turnovers and just kind of careless shot taking and a lot of the hero ball stuff that we've seen at times. But it wasn't the defense, I didn't think at all in this game that was anything to be concerned about.
Yeah, I agree. And you brought up the offense in the fourth quarter. I believe the Wolves had more turnovers than made field goals in the fourth quarter. I think it was like 6-4. And what you said, hero ball. I think that's the best way to say it. It was, Cat had a couple of rough possessions early in the fourth quarter, but then late down the stretch when it got down to 3, the Wolves pushed it back to 6 and had a couple of stops defensively. And then on consecutive possessions, you had D'Angelo Russell taking the shot clock down, which obviously the Wolves were up 2 possessions. You try and burn clock there, and then rejecting a screen and dribbling into a tough mid-range shot. And then the Sixers score, you come back down, and Ant does effectively the same thing. or starts to do the same thing. I think there was one more bad possession in there, and then ultimately, like you mentioned, he got his pocket picked, and that was nearly the game right there. And then ultimately, the Sixers still had a chance to tie the game at the buzzer, and thankfully, the Wolves played strong defense on the final possession. So again, doing just enough to win. But this time, it was very much the offense that struggled down the stretch, and the defense that held their own. And actually, those last couple of possessions were really, really strong defensive performances. But offensively, it's like they stopped. We talked about this, the Magic game on Wednesday in the fourth quarter. There was a stretch when it got a little dicey. I think it got down to like 9 points against Orlando. And Chris Finch started calling sets every time down the floor, and they ran a bunch of plays in a row instead of just kind of this freer flowing offense that he prefers to play. And in this game, it almost felt like that would have served them really well. And I don't know for sure. It didn't seem like they were calling as many plays down the stretch as they did in Orlando. And then it kind of devolved into this, ISO ball that they ended up playing a little bit. But yeah, I thought the offense was a little bit clunky in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota was 4 for 18 in the fourth quarter. Depending on the stat service used, Courtside had them for 6 turnovers. The final book on NBA.com had the Wolves for 8 turnovers. But
Okay.
That's twice as many turnovers as made baskets in the fourth quarter, the most important quarter of a close game. And that is something that needs to change. The decision-making, the mentality, because I think my interpretation of it is that players are doing it for the right reasons. Like if you mentioned D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, they certainly are guilty of it, taking hero ball type shots in big moments down the stretch. But I feel like they're doing it because they're saying, I can do this. I can get us the win. Put this team on my shoulders. I'm going to make this big shot, which is what you want, but it's not what gets the team involved, and it's not what got you to that point in the first place in the game. It's not what got you the lead in the game. And so I think it's almost like the untangling of that mentality, and to step back in the first place and be like, well, that I'm glad you think you can make that shot, and that's wonderful, but a long contested 2 in this situation is not the shot we need, even though you believe you can make it.
Right.
Like, let's just work for better opportunities and see where this can be a bit of a problem.
Right. And D'Lo's ability to make those shots, and I'm not, both D'Lo and Ant can both make. D'Lo's actually a really good mid-range jump shooter, but that's one of those skills that you can fall back on that if you need to. And if he can get to those spots, and the Wolves don't shoot a ton of mid-range jumpers, and Finch doesn't want them to, but when D'Lo's open, he should take them. And in a tough spot and in a close game, those are the shots he can get off. And in a pinch at the end of the shot clock, at the end of regulation, whatever it might be, if D'Lo needs to shoot that shot, he can make it, and that's great. But if you run an actual set, run an action to get Towns the ball, and let him play make, let him shoot the ball, let Ant, get the ball in a more advantageous position than just, in isolation, when the defense really can load up on him. I think there's just a lot of more positive outcomes, if they're running actual plays in those situations. Another thing in this game that was kind of weird is, the Wolves ended up scoring, like we talked, the offense was clunky. They still scored 112 points, but Towns and Gobert combined to score only 20 points in this
20,
game.
yeah.
And it was weird. And they had 23 rebounds combined, which, is still a little bit lower than what you'd expect. I think Gobert himself, what was he? He was, Towns at 12 and 8, Gobert at 8 and 13. And Towns was just a little bit off all night. Gobert never really got involved. He obviously, both guys played a little less minutes than they typically would because of foul trouble. But it was like they were both so focused, and rightfully so, on slowing down Embiid, that like neither one of them really got into a rhythm on offense at all.
No, and it was an uncharacteristically inefficient night for Karl Anthony Towns. And it's kind of ironic because in our pregame show, we had looked at his last 5 games, and he was shooting 64% or something like that from the field over his last 5. He was just ultra efficient and just almost machine-like. And then maybe he was due for a game like this where it just didn't come as easily, whether it was him not getting the looks or not hitting the shots. But Karl, to this point, has been so good all around for this team. And Gobert has really, he's not been an issue. If you look at what has been plaguing the Wolves before this 3-game winning streak, like what are the issues? Why is this team not getting going? We've talked about this before. Rudy Gobert has not been the problem. So yes, it was a low scoring night from Towns and Gobert. 20 combined is probably not at all what you want to see from a couple of all NBA centers, bigs, however you want to label them. But if it's just an isolated game, then that's fine. We can move on and just figure out how to be better. But it's not ideal. So there again, to be able to win a game when your 4 and 5 guys combine for 20 points on an inefficient night, to be able to still win a road game, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and we've said this after each of the last 2 wins. Like, we're not like winning. This team was 3 games under 500, and they've beaten 3 shorthanded teams consecutively. 2 of them are really good shorthanded teams in Cleveland and Philadelphia. So, like, a win is a win, and the Wolves have still had to fight through some adversity in these games. And I think even if you remove some of the other context of like who they were missing and all that stuff, the Wolves are still finding a way to win close late games. And there's a mentality, and there's a like, for the Wolves to, like, they're not sitting there thinking, very likely they're not going to be sitting there thinking going into their game on Monday against Miami, like, man, we won our last 3, but those teams are shorthanded. Like, it's the mentality of, we were in these close games and we came out on top, and they can build on that and be, more confident that they can pull out, a game the next time around. I think that really matters. I guess kind of the last thing I want to talk about is the Wolves bench was actually really good in this game, especially Jalen Noel and Naz Reid. Both of those guys, they play so well together. That's been the case going back to last season when they did get to play together. And Jalen Noel had not played well recently, but he scored 13 points on 7 shots, was back to being the efficient player that he was early this season. Naz was very good. He had to play in the first half. I believe he came in late in the first quarter, I think, or maybe it was to start the second quarter for the first time, and got some second half minutes too. Both of those guys played really well in this game.
Yeah, and it was needed too. And especially, I think, for Jalen Noel, because he had just had a string of games where it just wasn't falling for him, and he was getting called for fouls more than he was making shots. So to be 5 of 7 tonight was important. Naz Reid was important. Taurean Prince was important off the bench. Kyle Anderson had a handful of points. Like, those 4 guys made a difference in this game. They truly did. And Noel, I just think he's so loud. Like, when he plays, I never wonder if he played in a game. Like, I know this, when he checks out, you're like, yep, Jalen Noel has been in this game, because he's shooting the shots, and he was good tonight. And I feel like he really needed that, and he needed to get back on track and back righted, because his production off the bench is important for this team. It was good to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming up Monday, they have the Miami Heat, who are, as of right now, at least extremely shorthanded. They played Friday night, and only 7 guys saw the floor for them because they had an injury list of about 6 guys. So we'll see who plays Monday. They haven't been quite as shorthanded here of late, but we'll see how that all comes together. So I have for today here on the Postcast. We go live after every single game on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube page. Be sure to subscribe and follow Locked On Wolves on all audio platforms and YouTube. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.